The granite countertops gleamed in the afternoon sun as Mark led me through his new beachfront kitchen, his arm wrapped possessively around his young wife's waist. Everything sparkled. The stainless steel appliances, the crystal chandelier, even Jessica's massive diamond ring. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, gesturing proudly at the ocean view. "Your mother would have loved it." I felt bile rise in my throat. My mother had been dead for exactly 3 months and 12 days, and here was her husband of 15 years, showing off the luxury home he bought with her life insurance money, while parading around his new wife who was barely older than me. "Mom hated the beach," I said quietly. "She got migraines from the glare." Mark's smile tightened slightly. "Well, people change, Emma. Besides, this is my life now, Jessica, and I deserve a fresh start. My name is Emma Chen, and at 32, I thought I understood grief. But watching my stepfather spend my mother's death benefit on a new life with a woman young enough to be his daughter, that was a different kind of pain entirely." "Of course you do," I said, gripping my purse strap so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mom would have wanted you to be happy." It was a lie. My mother, Linda Chen, had been suspicious of Mark's behavior in the months before her sudden heart attack. She tried to tell me something was wrong, that he was acting strangely, but I'd been too caught up in my own life, my law practice, my recent divorce, to really listen. Now standing in his $1 million beach house, watching Jessica fawn over the wine fridge that probably cost more than my car, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother's last voicemail. "Emma, honey, I need to talk to you about Mark. Something's not right with the insurance paperwork he had me sign." She died 2 days later, before I could call her back. "Oh, look at the time," Mark said, checking his Rolex. "Another new purchase. We have dinner reservations at 7. You understand, right?" I nodded, already heading for the door. "Of course. Thanks for showing me around." "Emma," he called after me, "I know this is hard for you, but your mother left the insurance money to me for a reason. She wanted me to be taken care of." I turned back, studying his face, the face I'd known since I was 17, when he'd married my mother and moved into our modest suburban home. He looked different now, somehow harder, his familiar features twisted by something I couldn't quite name. "Right," I said. "Mom always thought of others first." It wasn't until I was in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, that I let myself think about what I'd discovered 2 days ago. The truth about my mother's life insurance policy and about Mark's role in her death. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Sarah Rodriguez. "Got the files you requested. You need to see this." I started the engine, my mind racing. Mark thought he had everything figured out. He had no idea what was coming. 20 minutes later, I sat in Sarah's office at the police station, staring at the documents spread across her desk. We'd been friends since law school, and when I first shared my suspicions about Mark, she'd pulled every string she could to help investigate. "The original policy was only for $500,000, Sarah explained, pointing to a document from 2010. "But look at this. 3 months before your mom died, it was changed to $2 million. The signature on the change form doesn't match her handwriting." I laid out my own findings, the results of weeks of careful digging. Bank statements showing large transfers from Mark to Jessica dating back a year before my mother's death. Medical records indicating my mother had been in perfect health before her sudden heart attack. And most damning of all, evidence that Mark had been quietly selling off my mother's valuable Asian art collection in the months leading up to her death. He was planning this, I said, my voice tight with anger. The insurance scam, the new wife, all of it. He just needed Mom out of the way first. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "The signature forgery is clear fraud. And with the suspicious timing of your mom's death, we might have enough for a criminal investigation." "Not yet," I said, gathering the documents back into my briefcase. "I need more. I need to know exactly what happened to Mom." The next few weeks were a careful dance of investigation and pretense. I started visiting Mark and Jessica more often, playing the role of the grieving daughter trying to maintain family connections. Each visit was an opportunity to gather more information, to notice details that seemed out of place. Like the fact that Mark had cleared out my mother's home office before the police could examine it after her death. Or how he'd insisted on cremation, against her written wishes for a traditional burial. But it was during one of these visits that I found something that changed everything. I'd excused myself to use the bathroom, But instead of turning right toward the guest bath, I went left, toward Mark's home office. The door was locked, but I'd come prepared. The lock-picking skills I'd learned during my brief stint in criminal defense law finally proved useful. Inside, the office was immaculate, too immaculate. No papers on the desk, nothing in the trash. But there, in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, I found a small key labeled Storage Unit 23. I photographed it with my phone and carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. That night, I called Sarah. "I need a warrant," I said without preamble. "Mark has a storage unit, and I bet anything Mom's original files are in there." "The signature fraud isn't enough for a judge," she replied. "We need more." "Then we'll get more," I said, an idea forming. "How do you feel about some undercover work?" The plan was simple but risky. Sarah would pose as a potential buyer interested in the beach house. Mark had recently listed it, claiming he and Jessica wanted to travel the world. During the showing, she'd accidentally discover something that would give us probable cause for a broader search warrant. What we didn't expect was for Jessica to be the one to crack. Sarah was touring the house, asking all the right questions about the property's history, when she casually mentioned reading about the previous owner's death. "Such a tragedy," she said, watching Jessica's reaction carefully. "Heart attack, wasn't it? And so sudden." Jessica's perfectly maintained facade slipped for just a moment. "I told him it was too much," she whispered, more to herself than to Sarah. "The medicine. I said it was too risky." Sarah pressed her advantage. "I'm sorry, what medicine?" Jessica's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said. "Nothing. I need to make a call. The showing is over." But it was too late. Her slip was exactly what we needed. Within hours, Sarah had a warrant not just for the storage unit, but for all of Mark's properties and financial records. What we found in Storage Unit 23 made my blood run cold. Stacked neatly in a fireproof safe were documents detailing everything. The original insurance policy, emails between Mark and Jessica dating back 2 years, and most damning of all, receipts for heart medication that had never been prescribed to my mother. The same medication that, in high doses, could trigger a fatal heart attack while leaving almost no trace. I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by copies of the evidence, my hands shaking as I read through the emails between Mark and Jessica. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The insurance scam was just part of it. They'd systematically stolen and sold off my mother's art collection, piece by piece, building up a nest egg for their new life together. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Coming by for dinner tomorrow? Jessica's making her famous lasagna." I stared at the message, thinking about my mother's last voicemail, about her suspicions that had gone unheard, about how she must have felt in those final days, realizing something was wrong but not knowing exactly what. "Wouldn't miss it," I typed back. Tomorrow Mark would learn exactly what it felt like to have everything taken away. The lasagna sat untouched on Mark's elaborate dining table as 3 sharp knocks echoed through the beach house. Jessica jumped slightly, her wine glass clinking against her plate. "Are we expecting someone else?" she asked Mark, who had gone pale. "Police. We have a warrant." Detective Rodriguez's voice carried clearly through the front door. Mark stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "Emma," he said, his voice tight with sudden understanding. "What did you do?" I took a slow sip of water, maintaining eye contact as footsteps approached the dining room. "I did what Mom would have wanted. I found the truth." Sarah entered first, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She held up a document. "Mark Thompson, we have a warrant to search these premises in connection with the death of Linda Chen and suspected insurance fraud." Jessica burst into tears, mascara streaming down her face. "Mark, you said nobody would find out. You promised." His face contorted with rage. "Shut up, Jessica." But it was too late. As the officers began their search, I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of our entire dinner conversation, including Mark's casual admission about changing Mom's insurance policy for her own good. "You recorded me?" he snarled, lunging across the table. The officers grabbed him before he could reach me. "Actually," I said calmly, "I've been recording everything for weeks, including your conversation last Thursday about the unexpected complications with Mom's medication." The color drained from his face. "You can't prove anything." I opened my briefcase and started laying out documents one by one. The forged insurance documents, Bank records showing transfers between you and Jessica dating back 2 years. Receipts for heart medication that was never prescribed to Mom. And I pulled out one final paper with a flourish, a very interesting statement from Jessica's ex-roommate about your relationship timeline. Jessica collapsed into her chair, sobbing harder. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He said it would be easy. Just sign some papers, play along. I didn't know he was going to murder my mother. I finished for her. Funny how greed works, isn't it? Mark struggled against the officers holding him. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I did for you and your mother. Like slowly poisoning her with unprescribed heart medication. Sarah cut in, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Yes, we found the bottles in your storage unit, along with Linda's original insurance documents and quite a collection of forged paperwork. As they led Mark away, he kept shouting about betrayal and ingratitude. Jessica was arrested too, though her hysterical cooperation would probably earn her a lighter sentence. I stayed behind as the police searched the house, watching them bag evidence and take photos. In the master bedroom, they found my mother's missing jewelry, pieces Mark had claimed she'd donated to charity before her death. Sarah found me staring at Mom's jade pendant, now sealed in an evidence bag. You okay? I nodded slowly. I just keep thinking about her last voicemail. If I called her back. Hey, Sarah squeezed my shoulder. Don't do that to yourself. You got justice for her. That's what matters. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. Mark, faced with overwhelming evidence, tried to blame everything on Jessica. She, in turn, provided state's evidence against him, detailing their 2-year affair and his elaborate plan to kill my mother for the insurance money. The trial was surprisingly quick. Mark was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder, with additional charges for fraud and theft. Jessica got 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. The insurance company reversed the policy changes, awarding me the original $500,000 benefit as my mother's sole heir. I used part of it to establish a scholarship in her name at the local university's art history department, her lifelong passion that Mark had tried to erase. 1 year after Mark's arrest, I stood in my mother's restored home office, surrounded by the recovered pieces of her art collection. The insurance company's investigators had tracked down most of the pieces Mark had sold, and I'd spent months buying them back. Sarah visited regularly, helping me catalog everything and listening to stories about each piece. Stories my mother had told me that I'd half forgotten until now. Found something interesting in the evidence archives, she said one afternoon, holding out a small recorder. Your mom's old answering machine. There are some saved messages on it. With trembling hands, I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room. Emma, honey, it's Mom. I've been thinking about what you said last week, about how it's never too late to start over. You were right. I've made an appointment with a lawyer to change my will and insurance documents. I don't trust Mark anymore, and I need to protect what's yours. Call me back when you can. I love you. Tears rolled down my cheeks as the message ended. She'd known. She tried to fix things to protect me, right until the end. She'd be proud of you, Sarah said softly. You know that, right? I nodded, placing the recorder among my mother's beloved art pieces. I know, I just wish that you could tell her one more time how much you love her. That and how sorry I am for not listening sooner. Sarah smiled gently. I think she knew. Mothers always know. The doorbell rang, the realtor I'd hired to sell Mark's beach house. The proceeds would go to a domestic violence shelter, helping other women escape toxic relationships before it was too late. As I walked through the house one last time before the showing, I paused in the kitchen where Mark had once showed off his ill-gotten gains. The granite countertops no longer gleamed with quite the same sinister pride. Instead, they reflected the afternoon sun in a way that reminded me of my mother's smile. I placed her jade pendant on the counter, the last piece of evidence returned by the police. Its green surface caught the light, throwing patterns on the wall like the ones that used to dance in her home office when she'd tell me stories about each piece in her collection. We did it, Mom, I whispered, touching the cool stone one last time before placing it in my pocket. We made things right. The case made headlines, of course. Daughter uncovers stepfather's deadly insurance scam and justice served. Murder for money plot exposed. But those headlines missed the real story. This wasn't just about money or justice or even revenge. It was about preserving my mother's legacy, protecting the things she'd loved, and making sure her story wasn't erased by the man who tried to steal everything she was. As I locked up the beach house one final time, I thought about new beginnings. Mom had been right, it's never too late to start over. But sometimes, before you can move forward, you have to fight for the truth about the past. I fingered the jade pendant in my pocket, feeling its familiar weight. Some things I'd learned are worth fighting for. Some truths need to be told. And some legacies deserve to be protected, no matter the cost. The sun was setting over the ocean as I drove away, casting long shadows across the road. But for the first time since my mother's death, I wasn't afraid of the darkness. I had found my way through it, carrying her light with me, and that light, I knew now, would never fade.